Hello, dear learners. Welcome to my online class. How are you? I think you all are keeping well. By the grace of Almighty Allah, I am also fine. This is Hassan Islam, lecturer, Department of English, Tongi Government College, Gazipur. This lecture is for the students of Honors 4th year. Dear learners, today we are going to start a new topic from T.S Eliot. T.S Eliot's writing, The Metaphysical Poets. That is, he is thinking on metaphysical poets. So, first of all, we are going to know about T.S. Eliot. So, T.S. Eliot was an American English poet, playwright, literary critic, and an editor. He is best known as the leader of the modernist movement in poetry and as the author of such works as The Wasteland and Four Quarters. So, T.S. Eliot is a modern poet, and he was the leader of modernist movement. And some notable works of T.S. Eliot: The Wasteland, Murder in the Cathedral, and so on. And he was born on September 26, 1888. And his subject of study was poetry, metaphysical poets. And he died on 4th January 1965. First of all, we have to know what is metaphysical poet. What is metaphysical? What is the term? What do you mean by metaphysical? I think you all know what is metaphysic or metaphysical. So, if we go through the word, we find two parts of this word, that is meta and physical. Just look at this. The word meta means beyond and physical means physical nature. So, metaphysical poetry means poetry that goes beyond the physical world of the senses and explores the spiritual world. Metaphysical poetry refers to a type of very intellectual poetry. It is a type of poetry dealing with abstract or philosophical subjects such as love, religion, God, beauty, faith, and so on. So, this is metaphysical. The term metaphysical mean. Okay. Now, we are going to start from the metaphysical poetry. So, the metaphysical poets, that is, it is written by T.S. Eliot, and T.S. Eliot wrote about the metaphysical poets, and he expressed his thinking about metaphysical poets in this book. So, in this essay, which was published in 1921, The Metaphysical Poets, T.S. Eliot made several of his most famous and important statements about poetry, including by implication his own poetry. It is in this essay that Eliot puts forward his well-known idea of the discussion of sensibility. This is an essay by T.S. Eliot, where he expressed about the activities of metaphysical poet and how they are to be regarded, what type of activities they are carrying on. Then by 1921, T.S. Eliot has established himself as one of the leading new poets writing in English. His two collections of poems, Proof Rock and Other Observation, 1917, and Poems, 1920, had heralded the arrival in London Literary Society of someone who had in his friend and follow modernist poet Ezra Pound's words. So, this is about T.S. Eliot, and now we are going to know about this essay, that is metaphysical poets. What T.S. Eliot thinks about metaphysical poets. Actually, Eliot's article on the metaphysical poets is actually a review of a new anthology, Herbert J.C. Gracier's Metaphysical Lyrics and Poems of the 17th Century. Eliot uses his review of Gracier's anthology, however, as an opportunity to consider the value and significance of the metaphysical poets in the development of English poetry. Although the metaphysical poets were a distinctly English movement or school, it is known as a movement, and those who are under this group, they were known as the Metaphysical School of Poetry. And who is the leader of this movement? John Donne. John Donne was the leader of this movement. Eliot also draws some interesting parallels between the 17th century English metaphysical poets and 19th century French symbolist poets. In this way, he thought about metaphysical poets. Eliot begins by reminding us that it's difficult to define metaphysical poetry since there is a considerable difference in style and technique between those poets who are often labeled metaphysical. So he found something special, something difficult, which is difficult to define about metaphysical poetry and the metaphysical poets. We have explored this issue of defining metaphysical poetry in a separate post, but the key frame of reference for us as for Eliot was Samuel Johnson's influential denunciation of the metaphysical poets in the 18th century. So Eliot quotes Johnson's line about metaphysical poetry that the most heterogeneous ideas are yoked by violence together. So he has marked this line. What does Johnson said about metaphysical poets? About metaphysical poets, Johnson said that the most heterogeneous ideas are yoked by violence together. So Eliot's response to Johnson's censure, however, is to point out that all kinds of poets, not just the metaphysical, unite heterogeneous or different materials together in their poetry. So first of all, he is saying that there are some group of poets, and they, of course, they, have some heterogeneous or different materials together. So indeed, Eliot quotes from Johnson's own poem, and then Eliot argues that while such lines as these are different in degree from what the metaphysical poets did in their own work, the principle is in fact the same. Actually, the principle of writing poetry was the same. Johnson is guilty of that which he just Abraham Cowley and John Cleveland and other metaphysical poets for doing in their work. And Eliot then goes on to consider the style of numerous metaphysical poets, and that is he has drawn examples from numerous metaphysical poets. He points out that while someone like George Herbert wrote in simple and elegant language, his syntax or sentence structure was often more complex and demanding. And key to Herbert's mentioned is fidelity to thought and feelings. That is, different types of metaphysical poets have different way in expression, but all the they are rooted in the same way. And it is the union of thought and feeling in metaphysical poetry which will form the predominant theme of the remainder of Eliot's essay. So Eliot next considered that led to development of metaphysical poetry. So reminding us that Johnson Donne, the first metaphysical poet, was an Elizabethan, and Donne wrote many of his greatest love poems in the 1590s when he was in his early 20s. Eliot compares Donne's analytic mode with any of his contemporaries, such as William Shakespeare, George Chapman, who wrote first drama for the Elizabethan stage. Actually, at that time, Elizabethan stage was very popular, and at that time, William Shakespeare was there, and at the same time, John Donne, who introduced a new type of poetry, which is known as metaphysical school of poetry. So these playwrights were all influenced by the French writer Montaigne, who had efficiently invented the modern essay form in his prose writing. We can so this is the background of actually John Donne was in Elizabethan age, and how he established this new form of poetry. Okay, the development of Shakespearean soliloquy, where we often find a character arguing with themselves about a course of action in Hamlet's to be or not to be. This is the dilemma or modern dilemma, which was quoted by Shakespeare in his writing Hamlet. Hamlet himself, in a soliloquy, he was questioning himself, that is, to be or not to be. So this is a kind of dilemma. Okay. So this movement, this shift in poetry responded for Eliot by two major poets of the later 17th century, John Milton and John Dryden. So in the later 17th century, John Milton and Dryden was the most popular poets. Both poets did something consummately, but what they did was different. Actually, there were some difference between these two poets. Dryden's style was far more rational and neoclassical. Milton was more focused on sensation and feeling. So here is the difference. Okay, so it is Eliot then concludes the metaphysical poets by drawing some comparison between the metaphysical mode and 19th century French symbolists. Here he brought some comparison between metaphysical poets and French symbolists to demonstrate further that the metaphysical was not some entirely distinct variety of poetry, but that it shares some core efficiency with other schools of poetry. That is, here he points out that he wants to show that there are some similarities with the symbolist, French symbolist movement, or French symbolist. He found something, same. He then returns to Johnson's criticism of the metaphysical poets, techniques and measure. So then here he make a criticism about Johnson's view on metaphysical poets, and argues that whilst we should take Johnson's critique seriously, we should nevertheless value the metaphysical poets and look beyond poets like Cowley and Cleveland. Okay, so who are the Johnson's chief focus actually here? In conclusion, Eliot's essay was important in raising the profile of the metaphysical poets among his own readers. People who looked to Eliot for discerning critical judgment and viewed him as a touchstone of literary taste were inclined to go and read the metaphysicals. This led to a tendency among critics of Eliot's work to identify him as a later day metaphysical poet, a view which, as the poet critic William Empson pointed out. So here he again, say about Donne, Marvell, and so on. This is a criticism on metaphysical poets. So this connection between Eliot's own work and the work of Donne, Herbert, and others has been overplayed. Okay, and then influence of Donne is particular however, Eliot himself encourages such a parallel at one point in the metaphysical poets. Actually, he encourages some parallel at one point. He finds the similarity when he writes that poets writing in modern Europe civilization must be difficult because the civilization is itself complex and various, and so the poets do justice to this complexity and variety. So in the modern age, the people are facing so many problems, and it is there are so many difficulties. That's why the voice of poetry, the tone of poetry changed. Here he says this. Okay. And this is about the metaphysical poets, the criticism written by T.S. Eliot. I have given you a brief summary of this book, and in my next lecture I will give you more information regarding this writing. Till then, Allah Hafiz. Have a nice day. Thank you.